just wanted to say that welcome. We're having a virtual artist talk this evening, but we do have one more coming up in December. On December 10th, we'll have Jean-Marc Superville Sovac. He comes to us from Beacon, and he'll be here again on December 10th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. To receive your Zoom link for that event and any further information about Jean-Marc, you can email peekskill@sunywcc.edu, and we'll have that email in the chat. The Center for the Digital Arts, Peekskill Extension, is hosting this event. And since our gallery is closed, we've decided to bring the art to you. And we hope you enjoy this evening's presentation by artist Patricia Miranda. Patricia Miranda is the founder and director of Map Space and the Crit Lab. She has been visiting artists at the Vermont Studio Center, the Heckscher Museum, and the University of Utah, visiting artists at Purchase College SUNY, Kutztown University, and the WCC Center for the Digital Arts. She has been awarded residencies at iPark, Weir Farm, and the Vermont Studio Center, and Julio Valdez Printmaking Studio. She has received an anonymous Was a Woman COVID-19 Relief Grant, a grant from Arts Westchester, New York State Council on the Arts, and was a part of a year-long NEA grant working with the Homeless Youth Award. Miranda has exhibited at Odetta Gallery, Wave Hill in the Bronx, the Cape Museum of Fine Art in Cape Cod, Metaphor Contemporary Art in Brooklyn, and the Knies Barnes Fine Art Gallery in Larchmont. And now I turn it over to Patricia for her presentation. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm very excited to be with you all. I'm happy to, I'm going to share my screen. Happy to be here in Peekskill and to talk to you about my work. I'm excited to, I live in Manhattan and have a studio and project space in Portchester, and now a studio in Peekskill. So I'm really excited to be a part of the Peekskill community. I've been, of course, coming here for many, many years. So I love this town and I love this community, and I'm looking forward to getting to know more artists here and getting involved in the in the arts community here. So I'm going to talk tonight. I'm just going to set my timer. I'm going to talk tonight. I'm going to focus tonight on a recent project, a recent exhibition and project. And if I have time, maybe I'll talk about a couple other things, but I'm going to focus on this one thing. I hope that you will stay around and kind of have a conversation, because I'm always interested in talking to people afterwards. So a little bit about me. I'm an artist, curator, and educator. Like many artists, I wear a lot of hats. We do a lot of different things. And pretty much everything I do revolves around my art practice and my studio practice. And so I run Map Space, or Miranda Arts Project Space in Portchester, which I've been running for, I don't really want to tell you how many years, over 25 years. And that space has been kind of gone through many incarnations as a gallery, as a project space. I developed a collaborative workspace residency program there, have done all kinds of gallery talks and workshops and all kinds of stuff. So it's an artist-run space. I'm a big advocate of artist-run culture. So artists gathering together and creating opportunities and for one another, and create new collaborations and new kinds of ways to work together. Most recently been really involved with the Crit Lab, which I founded and am the director of, which is a kind of what I call an alternate ecosystem for artists outside of academia, who are often kind of without a critical community, a place where you can really engage with people in really rigorous dialogue and critique. It has a really ethical stance, and a stance also of radical optimism and radical listening. Those are kind of some of the tenets of it. This past weekend, we just had our very first Crit Lab Alt MFA, which is, it's not an accredited Alt MFA, but it's a program for artists, again, like the greater Crit Lab, outside of academia, who may or may not want to get a degree, but are looking for that kind of higher level academic dialogue. So we had 13 faculty and 29 participants this past weekend. It was really thrilling and exciting. We had visiting artists, lectures, we had group critiques, We had collaborative and simultaneous drawing projects and a fabulous walking project. So it was really exciting. So I'm still like buzzing from all of the stuff that happened over that 4-day, basically 12 hours a day conference, filled with lots and lots of exciting ideas and everything. So artists coming together as working artists and kind of, you know, building community and kind of talking about their work. So that's pretty exciting. So you can check out that program and more about that. There's like, the Alt MFA was a 4-day kind of residency sort of program, and most of the Crit Labs are 5-month, you know, 5-session monthly meetings where artists gather together and bring work and talk about their work. And we have 6 sessions going now, and new sessions will start up in February. So I'm always happy to talk to artists about what they're thinking about and the things they're looking for in community, and all of that. So as a curator, I've curated a lot of exhibitions. In fact, an exhibition, I was thinking about the STEAM exhibition, Sherry, that I curated in 2014 at Arts Westchester, which is a really big, exciting exhibition that Sherry was a part of. Recently, I have done a couple of curatorial projects, actually a bunch in the past couple of years. I'm just gonna show you 2 quick things. This is an exhibition that is currently on view at Ursa Gallery in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is also an artist-run space. This is the inaugural exhibition at this gallery. I love working with artists and artist-run spaces. I love working in alternative spaces, as well as, you know, your kind of classic white box galleries, and curating both within academia and in galleries, etc. So this is a kind of an exciting exhibition in that it is an exhibition that I co-curated with Alexandra Rutsch-Brock, who is one of the London Calling Collective. That is 7 artists collective that I'm a part of. So Alexi and I are 2 of the 7 artists. This is a project that really came out of the pandemic and is, I think, a really powerful pandemic archive. So what you see here is the gallery space, and on the wall is about 860 or so pages of a year-long WhatsApp conversation between the 7 artists. So we started this conversation in October of 2019 when we went to London together, and it continued throughout the pandemic. And so several of the artists all live in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and then 2 in Connecticut. Several of them live alone, and also obviously with all of us dealing with the kind of repercussions of the pandemic, this WhatsApp conversation became a kind of a lifeline for us. And so on the walls, about 860 or so pages of what ended up being a 3,783 page document with 25,564 posts over a year long from October 2019 to 2020. So a very exciting project, and I think historically important, right? A record of this pandemic and the way that these 7 artists kind of stuck together and created a chosen family. So in the show, we papered the walls with the WhatsApp conversation, and there is a stack of paper that you can't see that's about a foot high. That is the rest of the pages from this conversation. And on top of the wallpaper, we installed artwork from all of the artists in a kind of very interesting dialogic kind of installation, so that the work is talking to one another, the work is talking to the conversation, et cetera, et cetera. And in the middle of the room on the pedestals, you can see there are 7 small accordion fold books, which was a project that we started while we were in deep lockdown. We wanted to make something small that we could collaborate on that would fit into a typical New York City mailbox. And so we created these small accordion fold books. Each book went to each artist, so each one went around 7 times and created these beautiful, a little hard to see in this image, but beautiful collaborative accordion folds. So if you can get up to Bridgeport, it's open on Saturdays, and you know, I'd be happy to kind of plan a time to meet you there. I think it's a pretty exciting exhibition. And in December, my work will be on view in installation at Main Window Dumbo. And this is a space that's been curated since in the 80s. It's one of the great things about this is it's pandemic proof in the sense that the window is open to the street. So the installations are done and are kind of available for people to see at any time. This is a beautiful installation by the artist Lina Puerta. And my installation will go up in the middle of December. So I'm pretty excited about that. And it's work that's kind of related to the work that I'm going to show you tonight. So I'm going to focus on an exhibition that I had recently in August through September of 2020 at Odetta Gallery in Harlem. And this was the final show in this space. Like many galleries, Odetta has decided to go online. and was interesting. It was an interesting project to do during a pandemic. We got a New York City permit to have the reception in a Marcus Garvey Park, which is right nearby the gallery in Harlem, and so that people could come to the gallery and we could still have that kind of opening while being really safe and all of that. So this is a domestic space. It's a Harlem townhouse, which is interesting in relationship to my work. And so this is the downstairs space where my solo exhibition was, and this is the upstairs space. So just another show that I curated with the London Calling Collective. And the two exhibitions, Radical Women upstairs and Radical Women Seeing Red upstairs, and then Seeing Red, Patricia Miranda downstairs, were both kind of in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, so the women's right to vote. And so the upstairs space was an exhibition of the work by these 7 artists again. And this work that you see on the wall there is a piece of mine that I created specifically for the curated show upstairs. And you can see that it is a townhouse, so it is a kind of a domestic, structured space. And I find that really interesting and fun to work with as a curator and as an artist. So this is the view going down into the downstairs gallery. And one of the things that's exciting, again, about working in these kind of unconventional spaces is you discover interesting things when you create something that you want to be sort of site responsive, right? Kind of in reaction to the site. So one of the exciting things was that, of course, as you walk down the stairs, the lace pieces kind of revealed themselves on the way down. And so I'm going to give you, because this is installation work, the still pictures don't really give you a sense. And I mean, as many of you who may or may not be artists know, that it's really different seeing art in person, but we try and kind of create the conditions to have at least a sense of what this installation was like. So the little video that will kind of take you through a little walk through, so you can see as the lace begins to emerge as one goes down the stairs. So this exhibition is comprised of a body of work that I've created, pretty much almost all of it. Some of the small books are earlier, but pretty much all created during the pandemic, of 2 large lace installation and some small book works. So everything in this, and then there's one piece in here that you'll see, I'll talk about more, is this one, basically it's an Italian nightshirt. And so all of the works in this exhibition are dyed with the cochineal insect dye. Cochineal insect dye is a historic dye. I've been working with natural dyes and pigments for several decades now. This is a little bit of a display of the cochineal itself and some of the tools used in making the dye. And you can see here the way the work was installed. Again, particular to this domestic space, adjusting it to kind of work there. And you'll see when I show you some other images how this work can, morphs and changes. I was interested in working, at a monumental scale, but also thinking about, the kind of machismo and also ecological footprint of monumental works. And so the lace works allowed me to make something that's very large, that kind of folds up into something quite, light and small and ecologically sound. The book projects, all of the books are all taken. They're found books that I got from a deaccessioned books from a convent library in New Jersey, where I led painting retreats for many years. And I've dyed the books, and I've intervened with them in various ways, like pearls you saw in that one sewn between the pages, and some of them are cut and also, pierced in this particular way. I'm interested in material as not just as a kind of a means, like an aesthetic choice, but also as a content choice. So all of the materials that I use are considered really carefully in the choices that they're made. So I think of materials as witnesses, right, through history, and witnesses to history. And so I use materials very carefully. So I'm going to talk about cochineal in a little more detail in a while. But this kind of little walkthrough gives you a sense of the work in the physical space. So this is the one of the two pieces. These are the two pieces that are installed in the gallery. These are installed in my studio currently in Portchester. And of course, which has these 12 to 14 foot ceilings. It's a big loft space. So it's sort of your classic, you know, kind of white box kind of space, neutral. Well, nothing's neutral, but a space where one can hang work and have it kind of extend out. And so what's interesting about putting them into the Odetta space was beginning to think about how they might morph and change. So I started working with lace, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago or something like that, and started with lace from my family. So these two works are called Lamentations for Rebecca and Lamentations for Ermenegilda, which are my grandmother's, my Irish and my Italian grandmother's names. And when I started working with lace, one of the things that happened that was a real surprise to me, and actually a real delight, was that people started to see the work that I was doing. I probably posted it on social media or what have you. And they said, wow, I have lace. Would you like me to send you some lace? And I thought, oh, that's exciting. And so people started sending me lace and then sending me more lace and sending me more lace. And it's really kind of it became an amazing thing. So both of these two works that are fairly large, they're both about 15 feet wide by, again, it adjusts according to the space, but about 15 feet wide by 11 feet tall and can morph and change, right? If I want them to be more monumental, the textile allows me to do that and to kind of adjust it to different spaces. All of the lace in these two works is completely and entirely donated lace. And this has been such a beautiful, unexpected part of the project that I started documenting all of the lace. So anytime someone sends me lace, I photograph it, I photograph the box, I photograph every single piece of lace, I measure it, and I'm working on a project of, a book of all the documented lace. Sadly, the first two, basically like more or less the first two boxes that I got, I didn't document all of the lace before I dyed it because I really didn't realize that this would morph into this beautiful, kind of collaboration with people. I mean, people started sending me stuff because they wanted to be part of it, sometimes because they had it and they didn't know what to do with it and they didn't want to throw it away, sometimes because they wanted to be part of the project. And so this lace is, whatever people send me, I will use. And you can see that there's lots of different colors, kind of variations in the color of the cochineal. And the reason for that is partly the vat. So you can see this piece, these two pieces, the kind of batches of dyeing were done at slightly different times during the pandemic. And so the color, for whatever reason, the dye vat comes out slightly differently. So there's that. And also, the different fibers will dye differently. So an animal fiber will take the dye one way, a vegetable fiber will take the dye another way, and then a synthetic fiber will take it another way. And so when I'm getting this lace, whatever someone sends me, I use. I'm using it all. And so there's antique lace, there's vintage lace, there's natural animal fibers and vegetable fibers, and there's also a few, not as many, but a few synthetic fibers in there. So that's been a really beautiful part of this project. And so you can see that some things like this is a natural fiber and this is a synthetic fiber. And so it will take the dye really differently. And when you see the work here, this is the work hanging in the space, you can see how different it is. In my studio, it's hanging, it kind of has these jagged edges, it extends beyond and aside. And of course, in the Odetta gallery, I made these adjustments, and also we decided, excuse me, we decided to hang it away from the wall. And so when it's against the wall, it has this more graphic quality. It's much more sort of hard-edged. The shapes in between become really kind of concrete and visible. And here it is, it has a softer feel. The delicacy of the lace is sort of more foregrounded. And again, I thought that was interesting because it reflects also the domestic nature of this space. So this is an image of the work in situ. Excuse me. So one of the things that I'm thinking about, I have been thinking about throughout this process of working with the lace, I'm thinking of the history of lace making, and its role in women's lives throughout history. Lace being something that would have been mostly originally made in women's homes or in kind of religious institutions. And then of course later in the 19th century made both in people's homes and also in the factory. So this idea of the domestic labor, the hidden labor of women, is kind of embedded in the nature of the material of lace. And what was interesting also in the pandemic was, of course, we were all suddenly at home. And I had been thinking about these ideas about domestic labor and hidden labor before, right? We went into lockdown. And when we went into lockdown, suddenly we're in our homes. People are teaching at home, teaching from home. They're raising their children at home. Our homes are open to the street because we're all Zooming, we're all in each other's living rooms. And suddenly this domestic space that had formerly been, all these notions around domestic labor that had formerly been hidden become visible. So I'm very interested in the ideas of domestic labor made visible. And by extension, domestic labor, by extension, also kind of low wage labor, essential workers, grocery store workers, gig workers, people who function within a very a precarious kind of economy, and the way that those things were not visible before, and that the pandemic made them visible. So this was a layer of this work that revealed itself through it being installed in the pandemic that I was particularly interested in. So even though these were 90% sewn when I brought them to the gallery, because of course there's a site specificity to this, or a site responsiveness, if you will, I still had spent about 4 full days kind of making adjustments. I didn't unsew things that were there, but I kind of added, I adjusted edges. I tried to determine how to make this work make sense in this space in a way that, you know, was again site responsive to this environment. And I also again was very interested in this being a domestic space, right? It's a townhouse that was built around at the same time of like the height of lace making in the 19th century, and that was an aspect that was also kind of a layer of something that I was interested in. So again, the lace, the cochineal, these are all things that bring not only an aesthetic kind of sensibility, but also bring content with them. They bring their own histories, their own you know, vernacular into the room, and I like to think of myself as collaborating with that vernacular. So this is a close-up of one of the pieces when it was in my studio, and you can see that I would call myself, I am what I would call an intentionally sloppy dyer in these pieces, because I've been working with natural dyes and pigments for, again, several decades. So I'm very familiar with the wide range of them. I focus, my research in this field is, you know, connected also to like a historical research, and in a making research, right? And the historical research is particularly attached to materials that were used in painting and books, as opposed to kind of a really rich tradition of textile dyeing. So there's a slight difference in the interests, my sort of focus. In any case, I'm intentionally sloppy dyer, and what that means is I don't filter the vat. I don't filter the dye stuff out of the vat. I will dye the material with all of that cochineal residue in the dye. All of these lace pieces and the books are dyed 4 or 5 times. So dyed and dried, dyed and dried, dyed and dried, as a way to kind of build up not only the color, but also the kind of residue of the cochineal. I want that to be really evident on the surface of the material. You know, I'm thinking of this kind of very feminine, like lace is this very delicate feminine kind of thing, and the cochineal is this earthy. Also, they're also the body, the exoskeletons of the female cochineal insects. So there is this idea of this kind of visceral, earthy bodiliness kind of inserting itself into the pristine gallery environment. So that's an important element. So the pieces kind of have this, you know, stuff on the surface, and they are visceral and sometimes have a smell, and, you know, some of the cochineal falls off, which concerned the gallery director a little bit, but it was fine. Additionally, on the work are these small plaster pieces that you can see, and these are originally made. I make them in clay, and then I make rubber molds and cast them in plaster. And so plaster is interesting to me as a material, right? Because it is fossilized bones, essentially, right, of animals, ancient animals. And so it references bones, and also body parts. So what's exciting for me is that I'm looking for a kind of a meaning that can unfold on multiple levels. And so there is a reference to the body in both the lace, of course, and the cochineal, and also these plaster pieces. What's really exciting is when people come in and see all kinds of things in them that you didn't see. So people came in and they saw shells, they saw tassels, they saw teeth. One person said they looked like noses, which I thought was so awesome. And also like breasts or eyeballs. And so that reference to the body, like the hard body, the soft body, the idea that textile wraps us from cradle to grave, and that this relationship of the hardness of the body and the softness of the body being something that's in the space together. The pieces are pinned, the plaster pieces are pinned, they're not sewn. Part of that is I want the installations to always feel like they're in the state of becoming, right? Like they haven't quite made it there yet, that they'll always be in a state of becoming. And the kind of contingent nature of the pin, like you could pull that pin off and then that piece would fall off. And so that's very interesting to me, right? And also means that when I install it in a different space, it will adjust. The plaster pieces will probably be in different places and I will move them around, which happened, you know, from the studio to the gallery. I'm also interested in pins as like, you know, they're sharp implements that are related to the making of lace, that are related to sewing, that prick and poke and suture and mend, right? They're things that make a hole, and they're sort of, they have that violence of the pricking and all of that. So all of that stuff is inherent just in the nature of this little pin being on the surface of the pinning the thing in place. And so you can see that when you step back, those plaster pieces also become a bit like punctuation points or musical notes, or people started to see the large lace as book pages, relating it to the small books, which is also really exciting for me because I thought of the books as very much connected, but one doesn't always know how a small intimate book is going to kind of work with a very large lace piece. And so the Italian night dress was an element that I had done before I had been to the gallery. So I hadn't seen the gallery, and I had always imagined that it would be hung in the middle of a space. But again, when one is doing an exhibition, one has to think about the space and what the space will how the space will morph around the work, how the work will be in relationship to the space. And so I hadn't seen this amazing like, I don't know what you would call it, sort of, it's an exit, basically. It's another exit. And there's a metal ladder behind there. And I brought the piece in and I was like, oh my goodness, that's got to go there. And I think that at first the gallery director was like, oh no, I don't know if that's really right, but it really was exactly the right place for it. So again, this piece changed from my original conception of it being in the middle of a space and was then placed in this space, which made it sort of more ghostly. And the reference to the time period was even more powerful. And if that stone foundation is that's the original 19th century foundation of this townhouse. So that was pretty exciting to me. And you know, the dress would like slowly move, like really slowly, so that you couldn't really see it move if you looked at it, and you might turn around and look back and it might be facing in another direction. So it had this kind of animated, ghostly feel that was, again, referencing the women, the many centuries of labor that the lace references. So the books, as I said, are all books that came from this particular convent in New Jersey that has a whole history. This particular order of nuns, both in the United States and also in Europe, had a history of liturgical arts. So they did manuscript illumination, they did ecclesiastical embroidery. It's a pretty amazing place. It's a historic, it's a landmarked building in New Jersey, and they have this amazing library where they have some really old, they have a couple of manuscripts, and they have incunabula, and they have a choral book. So it's pretty exciting. Anyway, they deaccession books, periodically. These are Victorian era books. And again, so I'm intervening in the books in various ways. These books are submerged, these particular ones are submerged in the cochineal entirely, the whole entire book, again, several times in order to get the density and make sure all the pages are dyed the way at the level that I want. And so I'm interested in the book, actually, not just as a reader, but I'm interested in the book as a form, right? As a sculptural form. So I think of books as four-dimensional objects, right? They're objects in space, you can hold them, right? So they're physical, they're three-dimensional, like a sculpture. And they're also body size. They're made to be held close to the body. They're made to be held in your hands. So they have an intimacy that's really powerful. They're also kinetic, right? Like you turn the pages, you move the book around, you turn it upside down. Every time you turn the page, you have a different object, right? Essentially a different object. And they're also deeply conceptual objects, because when you're reading a book, when you're in the story of whatever you're reading, you're neither in the book or in the room. You are then in the narrative that you're reading about. So I think of books as enormously complex objects in and of themselves, and I love to work with them. This is a small grouping of books that I've worked with. So this is a Florilegium series. Florilegium is a term that refers to a medieval book, a garden book, a book of flowers. It also often can refer to a Mary garden, which would have been like, in kind of medieval imagery and stuff, was a private garden of flowers. And I think of these books as in a sense, like flowers. And so as you can see, I'm sewing pearls between the pages in these, and cutting and various other, and then puncturing it too, which I think was a nice reference to the lace and the pins and the sewing, and also the religiosity of some of these texts. So this is a suite of drawings that were done during the pandemic. The prior books were done before. And this is a book that came from the convent, and it was an exegesis of the Psalms. And the book had been falling apart, so the pages had already been coming apart. So I dyed all the pages. These are probably dyed 4, 5, 6 times. And I began to sew, so they're dyed with the cochineal, and then I sewed freshwater pearls onto the pages. And I'm sewing the freshwater pearls onto words, particular words. I'm sewing the pearls over the gendered words, right? So any gendered word, so a male gendered word gets a single pearl sewn over it, and a female gendered word gets multiple pearls. So far, I've only come across one female gendered word, which is interesting, of course, because when you read these texts, they are Christian religious texts, so therefore, of course, the kind of language is going to be overarchingly male, and also, of course, the pronoun in English, the default pronoun in English is male, and so I thought that was very interesting. It sort of reveals this kind of gendered bias in the text. And when I was making these, one thing that happened that was interesting for me was, of course, that I had to read the text in order to find those words, right? I'm not reading it sequentially, so I'm not reading in that conceptual way where I'm outside of the book. I'm picking them up, and they have these really kind of very Victorian, right? The language is very Victorian, lots of these and thous, and the chapters are like flesh, the footstool before which we bow, and what is it that we learned by trials and dangers? So these very kind of archaic and I don't know, I found fascinating chapter titles. So I would pick up a page and kind of be drawn to it maybe by a chapter title. And then I would proceed to read the text and prick the text wherever the gendered words were, and then go back and sew the pearls. What happened for me that was very interesting in this action was I was able to read these texts. So it's a religious text, right? So it has an agenda, it has an ideology that I may or may not agree with or want to subscribe to. And the language also has that, of course, and the language is also very poetic, it's very lyrical, it's very sort of spiritual and metaphysical. So this kind of way of reading, where I was both pricking the words as a kind of a, almost like a critique while I was reading, allowed me to be able to read this text in a way that was more like reading poetry, right? To not subscribe to its ideology, but to be able to appreciate its very kind of poetic way of speaking. So cochineal is really important, and I don't only work with cochineal, I work with a lot of different materials. They do tend to be materials that have a long historical tradition, and so this exhibition, everything is using the cochineal. This is actually a thing of cochineal, so you can see they're little insects. Cochineal is a scale insect, it's not a beetle. I've been, correctly schooled on this by entomologists. And the only difference between, you might have heard of cochineal, and people will often refer to it as a beetle. But the difference between a beetle and a scale insect is that the beetle has legs and walks around, and a scale insect does not. It kind of affixes to its food source and stays there. And so these are just some of the materials that are used. Cochineal will make, a lot of dyes will make a kind of an analogous family of colors. So the British red coats are dyed with cochineal, so that bright crimson red, all the way to the purple that you see here. So it'll make that kind of family of colors. And so I have this video which just shows the making of the cochineal. I'm going to play that while I tell you a little bit more about cochineal. So cochineal is really fascinating. It has this amazing history. I could talk to you for hours about it. So if you have questions later, I could talk your ear off. So cochineal is an insect that makes this red dye, as I said, and cochineal is indigenous to the Americas, to Mexico and Central and South America. Cochineal did not exist anywhere else on the planet until the Spanish came to the Americas. So it did not exist. So red is a difficult dye to make in nature. The insect dyes, there's only a few insect dyes, they all make red. One is kermes, which is where we get the term crimson and what dyed the Persian carpets. And the other one is lac, which is like the source for, shellac and Chinese lacquer and making the red dyes in that family. There's also something called Polish cochineal, which is unrelated to American cochineal. So it was hard to cultivate, it was very expensive. So when the Spanish came to the Americas during the conquest, they discovered the Mesoamerican people had this amazing red to purple dye that they had been using presumably for thousands of years. They were using it as dye for cloth, all those brightly colored clothing that you would see throughout Central and South America, and also as a paint and also as currency. So they used it as a form of currency. So the Spanish took this material back to Europe. It took several tries to get the cochineal safe, alive back to Europe so they could cultivate it in southern Spain, while they also, of course, were still importing it from the New World. And it revolutionized the dye trade. They managed to hide for 100, almost 200 years, the source of this red dye. So it is one of the materials that kept Spain a great power, right? And it played a really crucial role in globalization. There are many other things, obviously. Gold is the one that we think of a lot. In a way, cochineal is more ubiquitous because, of course, there were laws about color and material access and all of that. And all of this began to shift when you start to have cochineal coming into Europe. And there's amazing conquest era images of cochineal production, which I could share with you. If you email me or whatever, it's a pretty fascinating story. So you might see paintings in the 17th century where a woman is wearing a red satin dress. So the dress would have been dyed with cochineal and the painting would have been done with a paint made with cochineal. So it's, again, really fascinating. I think of these materials as witnesses through history. They're kind of silent witnesses. So the lace, a silent witness of domestic labor, and the cochineal, a silent witness to the conquest of the Americas by the Spanish. And it's also, cochineal also represents, as do other materials that came from Central America, the beginning of modern globalization, like a real shift in how trade happened, in the sense that Venetian trade earlier was a trade between cultures, and starting at this point, you really have trade almost solely by conquest. It's not that there weren't colonializations and conquests before this, of course, but this is a very, it's a dramatic kind of shift in the way that trade happens around the world. So here I'm making a very small batch of cochineal, and in the background you can see an overlay image, and that overlay image is are images from the wars in Central America of the 1980s, and that really is a kind of a reference as to the way, the wars in the 80s were not about cochineal, clearly, but it is a kind of a reference as to how the lineage of these colonial conquests and the colonial impacts reverberate all through today, and that we're still dealing with. We're dealing with now. And so I'm making the dye here, and this is alum right here. This material is alum, which is an aluminum potassium sulfate. It's an aluminum salt because this is a mordant dye, which requires a mineral salt in order to function. I could tell you a lot more about that if you have questions later. So I think I might just push this a little forward. You can just see sort of the material kind of. So again, I'm thinking of these materials not just as aesthetic means to an end, but actually as kind of bearing content themselves. So I know it's easy to kind of imagine in your head what like dyeing a piece of cloth is, but I also think the visceral nature of these materials means that showing you the process in action can even give you a greater sense of how these materials work. So this is a cochineal dye vat that I have, and I'm dyeing a piece of lace that actually came from an artist in Norwalk whose family had a lace factory in Norwalk, Connecticut. So this is a machine-made lace. It's also a synthetic material, and basically, it's just awesome to kind of see it emerge from the dye vat. And this is what my studio looks like when I'm kind of in the midst of making these two pieces. You might recognize some of the pieces of lace, but you can see very clearly, you can see the kind of detritus of the cochineal left on the material, because again, I'm not filtering. If you were making clothing, if you were dyeing clothing, of course you would filter the cochineal out before you put your clothing in there. You wouldn't want that kind of gritty, earthy stuff in your clothing. And so you can see things in various stages of being dyeing. So these circular pieces, someone had given me a box of lace that had a whole lot of these, as you can see. This isn't even all of them. So I started to dye them. And so you can see in various stages of dyeing. So this is probably dyed once, maybe twice, 2 or 3 times, and this is 4 or 5. And I don't, I'll play with the different levels of dyeing and how the dyeing is happening in various ways. So I'm just giving you a quick, I don't know if Sherry, you can tell me if we have time for me to talk about another project, but this is just a little glimpse of some of the materials that might be happening in my studio. Another material that I'm kind of obsessed with, and I could talk about, maybe I'll talk about briefly, are these, which are oak galls, which are wasps' nests, another historical material. But as you can see, I'm very interested in all of these different, the ways that these natural dyes both have a lineage and communicate, and I'm experimenting and I'm working with them in lots of different ways. Just wanted to give you a little glimpse of some of the materials that I work with. So again, not just dyes, but I'm also working with pigments. So this is lapis and chrysocolla and malachite, which makes beautiful colors. And these little beauties are Native American paint pots. They're iron oxide. So in here you can kind of see the hollow out the stone and store the paint in these little paint pots. In Europe, they stored them in shells. And this is malachite so that stone, this stone right here, that I've crushed up, not that exact stone, but a malachite stone, crushed up and made into this really gorgeous, gorgeous copper-based color. That makes me think of Egyptians. They used copper-based colors a lot. And then just some delicate flower, this is cornflower, some delicate flower colors. So one of the wonderful things about the exhibition was there's this beautiful catalog was produced, and I was really fortunate to have the painter and critic Jason Stopa write a beautiful essay about my work. And there is a PDF of it online, so you can read the essay and you can take a look at the full, both of the exhibitions, the upstairs and the downstairs exhibitions. So I could talk, Sherry, do you think I have time to talk about another project? Continue?
Yes, you have definitely 15, 20 minutes. Yep.
All right, great. So I'm gonna kind of jump over a couple of slides. I wasn't sure if we would get to this, but just to show you that I'm not only working with cochineal. This is a piece that I did that is working with red clay. But again, always thinking about the lineage of the material, right? So red clay is another material that has been used throughout history by pretty much every culture, and it has had a symbolic meaning for just about every culture. In fact, in the Hebrew language, the word Adam, or Adam, has 3 suffixes, and they mean man, red, and clay. So out of that tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the idea that humans were created out of the red clay, right? And in Aboriginal communities in Australia, the red clay was a sacred material, and that men would go on a journey to collect the red clay for the year. So it's a material that was found all around the world and considered incredibly important. And this idea that we come from the earth is kind of very much part of the lineage of red clay. And so you can see this is a piece that hangs overhead. And you can see the plaster pieces again. And on the bottom piece, there are the little metal milagros, which you may know from their little kind of, they're sort of common in Mexican, you'll see them in Mexican traditions, and also in Italian, especially, was where they sort of originated, Italian and Spanish traditions. And so someone might have like an illness, and so they might make a little milagros of an arm, or a breast, or a body, or a heart. So they were kind of like votives. They were like wishes. They were like promises, and they were also like thanks. So you can go into some churches in Italy and also in in Mexico, and you can find them sort of pinned to things and all that. I'm fascinated by these milagros and this relationship to the way that if you make a body-shaped object, that it can become almost like a talisman or a wish or a hope or a prayer or a thank you. This is another cochineal project, but I think, so these have been installed in lots of different ways, those cochineal doilies of various kinds. But I think what I'm going to do is talk about this project, which is another project that uses a particular material as a kind of a witness. I call these series witness series. And so this is a project that I did using oak gall, the wasp nest that I'll tell you more about. Excuse me. Let's see, take a drink. So I was interested in looking at the history of library destruction and the destruction of libraries through war and conflict, not the destruction of libraries through like, flood or fire or something like that, but particularly libraries that were lost in conflict. Because one of the things about conflict and culture aside, right, the destruction of culture, is that how do you destroy a culture? You first destroy its history. And one of the ways to destroy its history is through destroying its libraries. So the Library of Sarajevo, for example, in the 90s was targeted, was a library that was targeted in order to destroy the history of that culture. And so this has happened throughout history. So this is a project where I used the oak gall, which is a source of ink, to do this project. So these are oak galls. Oak galls are really fascinating. And if you're interested, you can forage for oak galls. This is a perfect time of year to do this. They are wasps' nests that appear on oak trees. So if you can locate a stand of oaks, or on a walk find oaks, you could just look for them, and this is a good time because of course the leaves are gone, and you can find your oak galls. So oak galls are made by oak wasps. An oak wasp is not like a paper wasp. So you might think wasps are the ones where they make those paper nests that are on the side of buildings. This is a different kind of wasp. This is an oak wasp, which is about the size of a sesame seed. So it's a very tiny wasp. There are a lot of different species of oak, or genus of oak wasps. And the oak wasp basically lays its eggs on the branches or the leaves of a tree. Most of the time the branches, but you'll find them on the leaves also. The wasp doesn't have the ability to make a nest. So in the eggs is a chemical that when the wasp lays its eggs on the branches of the tree, there's a chemical reaction between the branch and between the eggs. And the tree responds by forming these weird things called galls. They can look quite different according to what kind of tree it is. And so these were ones that came from the Greenberg Nature Center. An interesting fact about Albert Kinsey, who was the scientist who studied human sexuality in the 1950s, some of the premier studies on human sexuality. He was an entomologist before he started studying human sexuality. And he studied the sex life of oak wasps and donated to the Museum of Natural History the largest collection of oak galls. I find that that kind of weird trivia to be really fascinating. He started with the wasp and moved to people. And insects do have the weirdest sex lives, so that some ways makes sense. So the oak galls will look different depending on where they're from, where they're indigenous from, and what kind of oak tree. So you can see that these are, I did a project some years ago and got a grant from Arts Westchester to do this project to collect oak galls from all over the country, and to collaborate with artists on a particular project. And so I got oak galls from all over. So you can see where these are from. I talked to nature centers. People sent me oak galls. I foraged for oak galls. And then the one oak gall that I didn't collect are the Aleppo oak galls. And the Aleppo oak galls come from the Aleppo region of Syria and Turkey. And just to think about trade and its relationship to war and conflict, before the war in Syria, I was getting a particular kind of oak gall that were probably coming directly from Aleppo in Syria. And as soon as the war started, I've been unable to get those particular oak galls, and I only have been able to get these. These are the newer ones, and they're probably coming from the Aleppo region of Turkey. And just, again, to make that connection to Syria, that is the destruction of Aleppo is the fastest destruction of a culture in the entire history of humanity. And, a reflection in just the trade of this little tiny thing called an oak gall. So here's some foraging for galls that are on leaves of the trees. And why is the oak gall interesting? And you can see here's the hole, right? Like that's where the wasp lays its eggs on the branches of the tree. The tree forms this gall around it, and then he bores a little hole and flies out. So the galls might have, like if you look, oops, you know, you can see they can be really big, gnarly ones with lots of holes. They can have a single hole. They can have, these have multiple holes. And so it just depends on which kind of oak tree and which kind of oak wasp. Now, oak galls are really fascinating because they have this incredible history. They are one of two of the most common sources of ink all throughout history, right? There's basically an iron gallic ink made from oak galls, and there is a carbon ink. So if you've ever used India ink, right, or lampblack ink, like Sumi ink, all of that, that is a carbon ink. That is made from the soot of an oil lamp. So that's a really common, very black ink. The other ink that goes all throughout history is an iron gallic ink. That is made from an oak gall. And this is a bunch of different oak galls. So in fact, the word ink comes from the Latin word incaustum, which means to burn in. And that is interesting because it comes directly from iron gallic ink, because iron gallic ink is a caustic ink, so it eats into the surface of the material. So for example, all medieval manuscripts before the printing press, which were written on animal skin, were all written with oak gall ink. The Declaration of Independence was written with oak gall ink. The Dead Sea Scrolls was written with oak gall ink. In the East, they are primarily working on paper, and they are primarily working with a carbon ink, because the carbon ink does not eat away at the paper. And with working on animal skin means that the ink will still be durable. So both cultures had, the East and the West both had an iron gallic ink and a lampblack ink, but they used it in different ways that reflected the culture of the time. So it's a fascinating material, which I could again probably bore you with many more small facts. In fact, okay, I'll tell you one more because I can't help myself. So the term palimpsest, which you may or may not have heard of, a palimpsest, we often think of this in an artistic term as like a layering of memory, but palimpsest actually comes directly from the history of an iron gallic ink. So when you were working on a manuscript, when you were working on animal skin, that would be a precious material, right? The Book of Kells took 186 animals to make, right? So this is not an insignificant material. And so if you wanted to, so people would often reuse the skin, right? So they would scrape the ink away and they would rewrite on top of it. Well, now, because this ink bit into the surface of the skin, right, went into the like second epidermal layers, we can x-ray those documents. We've been able to x-ray those documents and read the text, the more ancient text that is underneath, that is not visible to the naked eye. That is the actual definition of a palimpsest. So you can nerd out on oak gall ink because it's so fascinating. So this project was about library destruction. And I'm using the ink again as my kind of witness. So I did a lot of research into the destruction of libraries. And I made a 16-foot scroll that documents every library that I could, locate, looking through like the records at the UN, all the places where records about library destruction were kept. Again, library destruction through war and conflict, not through earthquake or fire or what have you. And from the Library of Alexandria up through 2014 when I did this project. And so this 16-foot scroll lists all of them. It lists the years, the place, and what was lost in that library. And the the glass separatory funnel contains oak gall ink that I made that is set to drip about once every 30 seconds. And so it drips onto the scroll, again, obliterating one history and creating another one. On the wall are scientific drawings, or somewhat scientific drawings, or drawings based on a scientific methodology of drawing of oak galls, oak trees, and oak wasps. So there's the recipe there, and then there's like this is the chemical composition of the chemical double chain chemical reaction that you use in order to make the ink. And it's super fun to make, super easy and super fun. And then on the wall were images of libraries that I had collected. Now, obviously these are photographs, so I can only collect images from the era of photography. So these are 20th century photographs. And these are some of the photographs. So we have the one on the top left is the library in Sarajevo. There's some libraries in Kuwait and Iraq and different places. So you would look through here. That's a library in Kuwait that was destroyed in the first Gulf War. And this is one of my favorite images. You can't see the whole image in here, but this is London after the Blitz. So these are these guys, like if you could see the whole picture, like there's no roof, there's no back wall. The ground is just covered with rubble, and they're in there, you know, browsing the stacks. And so I think of this installation, just to go back to the initial picture, as a way to kind of, you know, talk about, to use this ink, this oak gall, as a kind of a witness throughout this history of library destruction. And I think that will be my last slide. I'll just go to the end here. And I can stop share. Yeah. All right. And I hope that you can stay around for some questions. I'm happy to kind of geek out on any of the sort of historical facts, or to, you know, talk about my work in any way. Anybody want to? I see a bunch of stuff in the chat, but I could take a look.
I'm just, hi, I'm Anna. I'm a fellow artist and, an educator as well. But first of all, your work is fascinating, and I'm so grateful for you sharing it. And I definitely had just a bunch of thoughts spark, you know, as you were talking. And one of them, I remembered this history of gamboge yellow, which you probably are aware of, and just how incredible it is that the natural environment and, you know, these sources of pigment and color can be witness to trauma and conflict, and it's really fascinating. So within that, maybe I do have a question, is I'm wondering, like, in your research, what else are you, like, what is your trajectory, or what other colors, maybe concentrations, are you interested in? What else, you know, is inspiring you these crazy days? So it's kind of a meandering question, but
no, I mean, it's a great
part you want to answer.
No, it's a great question, because I think of our artistic practice as a form of research, right? I mean, even if you're making what might not be considered to have like all this historical stuff behind it, but, you know, you're making beautiful landscape paintings, that's still a form of research, right? It's an investigation of light and color and kind of place, right? Location and all of that. So I think of artistic practice as a form of research, and I'm sort of a research nerd, so I love that. So, you know, I think of the making as a form of research, right? Like making with your hands, like making is a form of cognition, right? That neuroscientists have actually say this now, right? That you're doing another kind of thinking when you're making with your hands, that it's still a form of thinking. So I like this combination of moving in between the hand and the mind, like the thinking of the hand and the thinking of the mind. So I'm still really, really invested at the moment in the lace. And I don't know if I said this, but did I say this? I have like 5 or 6 boxes and maybe 5 or 6 envelopes of lace that people have sent me that I have not had time to open since the show ended, partly because I open it, I photograph every one, I measure it, I document it, and I'm like, in fact, I've been carrying them back and forth from Peekskill to New York because I keep thinking I'm going to have the time, honestly.
A mobile archive of lace.
I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, that has been, you know, like an enthralling and humbling part of this. So I'm still very interested in the lace. I'm interested in, again, it's sort of this kind of, again, inserting this kind of very delicate, visceral femininity into a kind of macho space of the gallery and stuff like that. I think the lace is amazing because it's mathematically incredibly complex, right? And every lace pattern has its own history. And so I'm sort of in that research a little bit now. And also mathematically, they're just freaking amazing that, you know, so that those big lace pieces, once I sew them together, and I'm not like a seamstress, I'm not like really super good at it. I just sew them together. But they have an amazing internal integrity, a structural integrity both like in the individual pieces of lace. And then when I sew all of these kind of very disparate materials together, they become something else. They have this really interesting structural integrity that it kind of tells me what it wants to be. Like sometimes one's like, no, I don't want to be sewn to that one. Like you thought that I went here, but no, I don't. I go, I do this. So it is this kind of, again, thinking with the lace. So I'm still really into the lace. I'm doing now more lace research. Now the pigment and dye research, the color research, I've been doing for 30 years. So I could bore you to tears with the color. I mean, I have a whole color lecture, like history of color lecture, because I'm very interested in not only the color, but also the history of how the color went. And that idea about gamboge, like about the way that materials hold trauma, I think is really like epigenetics, so the way that trauma can be passed down through DNA. I think that's how I was thinking exactly when I thought about the oak gall, right? In a kind of way to talk about library destruction, or the cochineal as a way to talk about, domestic labor and this kind of incredible, this hidden domestic labor and both the power and also the trauma of that, right? Because the lace making would have been a source of economic independence for some families, and sometimes the only thing that could happen, right? So there's, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's like the research kind of fans out. So the one red clay piece, I have a whole other series that's around red clay because it also has this very long, deep history. So I do tend to gravitate towards the materials that have a kind of a narrative. So you can come to the lace, you could come to the exhibition and, you don't have to kind of know all of the things that I'm telling you, right? Those are subtexts that are available. I mean, this is my hope, right? That you can encounter the work as a kind of interesting object, a visceral, interesting object that has this notion of femininity and monumentality and all of those things, and also not, care necessarily about those deeper histories. I want work that can unfold in layers if one chooses to kind of take that investigative path. So yeah, I think right now I'm in the lace trajectory. So I'm all in with the lace, and I'm sort of looking at, there's a museum of lace in the UK, and so I'm sort of in connection with some of the things around that. I don't know where that will lead me, but when you research, like, it takes you places and then you go there. So I think that's the way that I would, yeah, I mean, I could do a whole one on mineral research. That would be really fascinating, but I don't know if that answers that or not, but.
I don't know either, because I'm not really sure what I was asking, but I love your answer, and I'm grateful for sharing more of the process and the research process, and this idea that you work with your materials in a collaborative sense. I mean, I think obviously all artists work with materials, but you are sort of collaborating with the material in a way that's more kind of intimate and personal and more in dialogue with it. I feel that, more work that, I don't know. I'm just,
I mean, I've made
that's a really great
I've made that like an explicit
gesture.
part. Sorry. I've made that like an explicit part of it. You know what I mean? All artists are doing it, collaborating with their material.
Right, sure.
I've decided that collaboration is a kind of a powerful part. And then when I'm teaching, like if I'm working with, I teach, college and graduate school, but I also develop programs for K through 12 in museums. So if I'm working with a young person, and I took that picture out, I should have left it in, but in a museum or something where they're crushing up a bug, like first they have to do an investigation. What is it? What does it smell like? What do you think it is? And we have all kinds of, they always say really interesting things. And then when we figure out what it is, they're, oh my God. And then we get to talk about, well, where did your dinner come from? And what are you wearing on your feet? And how did that happen? And so it's this kind of revealing of the kind of, we live in a world where we're very detached from the means of production. So I think a subtext of this, in the work, it's not foregrounded in the work, but in my teaching it is, it's like, well, everything came from somewhere, you know what I mean? And it has a kind of a path that it traveled in order to get to your table. I think the pandemic also kind of made that more visible too, right? Like we're thinking about means of production. We're thinking about like trade. We're thinking about how things come to us and how we make choices about that. And even when I'm talking to third graders, I'm like, you're going to go out in the world and buy stuff. Like you might want to think about like, how did it get here and who made it and what were the conditions under which they did that, kind of stuff. So it's a very holistic and interdisciplinary way of thinking for me.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
Not only did people bake a lot of bread this pandemic, but they also planted gardens, and that's really, it's quite an incredible sort of side effect, positive side effect.
Exactly. And I think people are still thinking about it, right? Like I still think when I'm going to order something, I'm like, wait, what, can I do that here? Should I do that there? What do I really need? Is this important? That kind of stuff, I mean, there are habits that are really hard to break, these kind of consumer habits. Our entire lives are structured around them. But anyway, that's a different, Any other?
I'm about to jump off, so for everyone's benefit, I'm going to stop talking so I can continue the conversation.
Nice to meet you. I look forward to meeting you in person in Peekskill.
Yeah, and yes, so I look forward to connecting too. And thank you, Sherry, for hosting these awesome talks. And thank you again, Patricia. And yeah, I hope to reconnect soon.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other? Yeah, Joanne.
Yeah, Patricia, I love your work. It's
Thank you.
gorgeous.
Thank you so much.
Because I also love red. I do a lot. I don't go to the source. I just go to the tube.
Yeah,
I use
okay.
a lot of red paint. I'm currently in the pandemic, really doing lots of pure red paintings, because red brings me joy. It brings me happiness. It's bringing me comfort right now. You gave us this wonderful historic overview of red and where it comes from and the insect and everything. Does it emote any kind of special emotions to you, that color? Is it, because when I would never leave that room with your lace. It's just so gorgeous. Just the wall is just magnificent. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Does it give you an emotion, these certain colors?
Thank you so much for saying that. And I would love to see your red creations. Yes, in fact, I didn't say this. I mean, this is a really important part of the work. And, you always forget to say something important about the work. But, the two pieces were called Lamentations, right? I think of this work as mourning, like mourning, right? I think of it as mourning work. They're in a sense my own form of mourning objects, right? And that means, specifically those are my grandmother's, but I mean, it's wider than that, right? It's this idea. So during the pandemic, I was in my studio. I was just like away sewing and thinking and sewing and thinking about the layers of history and legacy in the objects was really, and that kind of, thinking about that in this moment in time. I mean, I think about that. I do a lot of work around grief and mourning in contemporary art in my, teaching and stuff. And I think about that. And I think my work is always a form of they're almost always a form of mourning objects in some way or another. So I'm often using the language of mourning objects, right? The milagros or mourning objects, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a kind of a feeling, but it certainly helped me to, I think, be in a space, right, of loss, a real space of loss, and to remain in that space, to stay in that space through the kind of action of a mourning object. I mean, I think of mourning, not to go too deep into this, but like grief is our internal sense, right? And mourning is the way that we take it outside of our bodies and we move into a healing process. And it's often through objects and performance, right? What are things that we find in all of our mourning traditions? There's objects. So for me, though, I have a whole other area of research in like the history of mourning objects and also mourning in contemporary art that I think is deeply related to my content. So it makes me feel better, right? But it's more because it's a solace it's a space where I can allow myself to experience the loss and the grief and not run away from it, which is much harder to do when I'm like at home thinking about it, right? But if I'm with the object and I'm thinking of this history and I'm thinking of, the people that came before and the people who come after, like the whole picture, right? My own loss and the losses that came before and will come after. I can be in that space of mourning. I don't know how to say that. Like I can really be in that space. I think that would be, right? I can be in it and experience it fully. Have that full experience of grief. And I feel like that's the only way, that's a mourning action is the only way that we can heal from grief, right? Is to have some kind of mourning action. And so, does that make sense? So they make me happy. They're not like joyful. It's not like, I'm not a joyful artist, right? In that sense, right? But I feel like the solace that is created through the making and through the sharing of these objects for me is deeply meaningful because it connects me to the people, to the losses I have, to the people that came before, to the people that come into the gallery who I had amazing conversations with people about loss during the exhibition and also about, just the beauty and all of that. But, so that for me is and then the connection when I'm opening this box of lace, I'm like, oh my God, it's like Christmas, it's so thrilling, right? That people would feel that they could share these intimate things with me and give them away. And I don't know. So yeah, that's, you know, an indirect roundabout, but I think that's the way it affects me. Yeah. It is definitely a healing action for me, for sure. And when I don't do it, when I don't make art, I'm not that, you know, I'm in the grief and I'm not really having the mourning part. I'm not really having the healing mourning part. So yeah.
Thank you.
Any other? Hey, Avery.
Hey. Well, first I want to say it was really fun to see you. I mean, since I know your work pretty well, but it was great to see it in this context of just like going through all these different projects and all these ways that you focused in on these different materials and how they've been, you know, incorporated along the way. And Joanna, I'm totally with you on the red too. So, but I'm wondering, when you get lace, I mean, and you know, my family has worked in fibers, so like I have some family materials too, and a lot of times I find old pieces and sometimes they're broken or damaged in some way. Have you found that you've been getting pieces that are damaged in any way? Have you been trying to fix them? Do you use them as is? Do you not use them?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. I just want to go back to the color for a second, because it occurs to me that like one of the things about the red is it feels very connected to the body. So the presence of the body is important to me in the work, right? In this work in particular. So even though there's not a body in the work, the presence of the body through like the lace, through the cochineal, through all of those kind of kind of, what's the word, like kind of refer to the body. So yes, people have been like, oh, I have lace, but like it's stained or it's damaged or something. I'm like, great, I love that, because of course it means it was used. I'm not looking for, I mean, I have bought lace when I had to do a big outdoor installation at UConn. I had to buy the lace because like, first of all, it was outside and all of that. So it didn't make sense. But for these pieces, I think of these much more, you know, as much more intimate pieces. And so the wear, the use, it being available and present. I mean, there is the big round piece that's in there has like a tear in it. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I mean, I think that's evidence of that history, right? More evidence of the bodies and the people that were connected to this lace. Yeah.
I did have another question about the books.
Yeah.
Did you find working with the paper harder than working with the lace? Because I can't imagine dyeing. I mean, I watched your process with the big vat of dye and putting a book in there and then having it dry, trying to separate it and put little pearls between it. Was it more challenging than the lace?
Yeah, well, challenging in a different way, right? Yeah, no, that's pretty, I mean, doing the books, like submerging the whole book is really interesting, because I have to kind of create a method so that they don't just kind of become like just a hard clump. So I'll like hang them, you know, upside down, I'll dunk them, I'll kind of brush the dye in between the pages before I submerge it. Like there's all sorts of things that one has to do. But I will say that sewing the pearls in between the pages was a pretty arduous process, and I want to do it again, but I'm sort of like, I'm trying to figure out if there's like, I don't like to cheat, right? Like I could have made a thing of pearls and kind of like, I could have just put a string and then just tied the pearls individually, but those are actually sewn in between, you know what I mean? So not the most practical thing, but so I think each material brings its own challenge to the table, right? In that, so those were hard, but harder in a different kind of way. But yeah, those exact things that you said, like, so it doesn't get like, sometimes I could smudge a book and then it's just like, it comes out like
I mean, it all gets stuck. I mean, that has happened to me where books get stuck in the rain, you know, you just try, and they all stick and they, you know, tear and half the page goes on the other side.
Right. So the trick to that, just to tell, this is a very pragmatic answer, right? Is that I take brushes and I brush I mean, literally between every page.
Okay.
We're talking about 1,000 pages. Like I'll brush the dye into every page before I submerge it. And then it's already wet. So it doesn't, what happens is when you have like wet dry, that they get stuck. So,
right.
Yeah. I mean, I love working with the books. I really, really do.
That would be a fun process to videotape.
Yeah, maybe. I need to get on that, right? I need to get on
that would be a fun process to see.
Yeah. I see Diana. Hi, Diana. Just saying hi. Any other questions or anything? Comments? appreciate all of you coming out. Though you, like, fortunately you didn't have to leave your house, so that's a good thing. Sherry, you have any comments or questions before we close it up?
I have a question for you. You have a practice as an artist and a curator. I was wondering if you could talk about how you integrate those roles, or are they completely separate for you, and how they influence each other?
Yeah, nothing I do is separate. Like I think of all of my different aspects, my teaching, the studio practice is the heart, like it's the center, right? And then the teaching and curating kind of come off of those, and the research. So those all kind of come out of like this, you know, sort of heart-centered, like, you know, attention to a particular idea, right? So in curating, I'm also thinking, I'm not thinking about materials I am thinking about materials in the same way, but I'm not thinking about the same materials, right? Like I'm thinking about how do artists' material practices kind of talk to one another, right? An exhibition is an artwork. It's both individual artworks and then it's also an artwork. So I'm really interested in how putting one artwork next to another artwork shifts or reveals something about each of those artworks that maybe weren't visible in the artworks on their own, right? I don't want to change the kind of artists, you know, I don't want to change a work in the sense, right? But I want all artwork exists in relation, in active relation to other objects. It exists in relation to other objects, in relation to its culture, in relation to its time, in relation to history, and in relationship to the future. I don't care what kind of art you make, it all is in relation. And so I think that's how I think about my practice as an artist, and I think it's also how I think about my curating, right? It's in relation. And also my teaching, really very much like that. It's all relational.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for coming. And any other questions in there? No, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm available to be in touch if you're Peekskill people. I look forward to, you know, meeting more of you in person and kind of getting involved in Peekskill more.
Well, you have some thank yous in the chat and people saying that they enjoyed tonight. And I also thank everyone for coming out and hope that we see you back on the 10th. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Keep creating.
Yes, we need art. It's really important.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Enjoy your.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Myron.
Take care. Have a good night.
You too.